Hello and welcome to Pod Street, the podcast from Writing WA featuring authors, illustrators, publishers and all things literary in Western Australia. I'm Laurie Steed, the Partnerships and Development Manager for Writing WA, and today we are featuring the wonderful Tracey Dembo. Tracey is a children's author who's passionate about encouraging big questions, daring dreams and wild imaginations. She believes in the power of good stories, well-timed jokes and freshly baked cakes. She's the author of An A to Z of Dreaming Differently, and this book is a time machine. Please welcome Tracey.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here today.
It's a pleasure to have you here. Now, look, I did some research because this is how I roll, and I saw that you work in your day job as a lawyer and a community-based director, and what I wanted to know is how you went from there over to the world of kids lit and children's books, and was that a deliberate decision? Did something happen in your life that spurred you in that direction?
Not so much a deliberate decision, but I guess I have always loved writing and I've always loved reading. And as a kid, if you had asked me whether I was a writer, I would have said yes, because I used to spend my lunch times making up storybooks with my friends, and, you know, I had sort of poetry and stories published in various journals and competitions when I was at school, but I never really considered writing as a career. And so when I left school, I had no idea what I wanted to do. And so I did the logical thing, which was to study engineering, which I hated after a year. And so I moved on from there to law. And I guess, I am a commercial lawyer, and I have worked as a director of community organisations like Playgroup WA over the last few years. But it was only really when I had kids of my own that I really came back to writing. And I think I just found myself scribbling, and what I found myself scribbling was picture books and storybooks for kids, because I think I was reading so many of them to my own children at the time. It just seemed to come naturally to me. And there's just something, I guess, very liberating about writing for kids and letting your imagination run wild. And I guess I naturally gravitated towards that. And so it wasn't intentional. It was just for my own pleasure initially. But over time, you know, I was fortunate enough to find out about the ASA, to do their literary speed dating program. And over time, I became connected to publishers and other people in the writing community, and it just kind of organically evolved from there alongside my other jobs.
I can relate to the sort of the world of wonder that comes when you start telling stories to your children, and I'm in awe of you writing those stories. I have an oral story I tell to my children every night. I am fairly sure if it were transcribed, it would have some bumps. So I'm in awe of that. I guess the other question that comes to light then is, you had sort of two worlds of work and writing, and parenting is in that mix too. How do you balance all of that, and how do you find time to put your creativity into it?
I'm not sure, to be honest, but I think I just compartmentalize my life, and so I sort of have my law side of things, I have my community-based side of things, my parenting side of things. I think I like doing lots of different things, and for me that's exciting, it energizes me, and I don't mind hopping from one thing to another, but it is interesting. Some weeks, you know, you have weeks of lots of parenting things, you have weeks of lots of law things, and, you know, weeks of lots of writing things, and it can be a bit of a juggle, but it's just, for me, a really enjoyable mix. You know, I love using that creative side of my brain, and I love that, especially in children's literature, you get to have the most ridiculous conversations, you know, about whether the way they've drawn a character has, with the hair frazzled and the eyes popping out of their head, you know, matches your expectations of it. You know, what's the best joke you can think of to use in a presentation, all that sort of stuff. It's so much fun, and I really love that there are these sort of counter forces in my life that kind of balance each other out, I guess.
And do you have a time of the day that you write, or a certain process you have to be in that creative space?
Yeah, I do need to be fairly relaxed and happy, I think, for me to be naturally creative. I will sit at a desk and I'll force myself to write even when I don't feel creative, but for me the morning's the best time. So, you know, I have a few days a week where I'm just dedicating it to writing, and I'll really try and get that done first thing in the morning, because for me that's my natural best time of day for that.
And I'm, as an adult writer, I'm part of like a critique group of writers. Do you have that in kids writing too? Like you have a sort of a networking writing group? Yeah,
there's such an amazing kidlit community out there, and I think when I first started writing, for me, I really thought of it as a solo enterprise, and it took me quite a while to realise that there is this community out there, and they are the most generous, wonderful, warm community. And so I do have certain friends who I will send my text to before I send it to anyone else. But there are really just so many amazing friends and wonderful people in that community who, you know, we swap work and we talk about things with each other and get ideas. And I find that that is a really important part of my writing journey as well.
And I guess the other important part is there's certain organisations within Western Australia, right, that kind of promote children's literature. Are you affiliated with those, or you don't really work so much with things like the Literature Board and things like that?
Well, I guess I'm still fairly new to the whole process, because my first 2 books came out for the first time last year. So I'm still getting to know lots of people within the community. I'm a member of Squibbie. And I do sort of go to writing events within the writing community, but I'm starting to meet more and more librarians, you know, people at the Literature Centre. I'm slowly starting to sort of talk at these events and getting to know people, and that's been a really exciting part of my journey too, just being able to connect with so many wonderful people in the community, whether they're booksellers, whether they're teachers, whether they're, you know, promoters of children's literature. It's really an incredible community out there.
And I guess the other thing that kind of blew my mind looking at your work is I was really interested in the process and how this works, and whether you sit down and you draft the text, if you have ideas of what things are going to look like, if you use storyboards. So how does that conceptual process go from start to finish? Sorry, go on. No, I was going to say, and the other part of that question would be, when do illustrators get involved? Do you source the illustrator? Do the publisher source? So if you could give me the potted version from conception to completion, I'd find that really interesting.
Yeah, of course. So I think everyone has a different process, and for me, there's usually a spike of inspiration that starts a story, and it might just be a thought or an idea, because picture books are really short form stories. So I normally get a flash. So for me, my A to Z of Dreaming Differently book, that actually came out of a moment of frustration where a well-meaning adult gave one of my daughters a picture book about the importance of following rules.
Oh, wow.
And it was just at that time the sort of book she didn't need, because she was, I guess, one of those kids who was always trying so hard to follow the rules that reinforcing an idea about blind obedience was not
not what she needed.
not necessarily what I thought she needed. And so that got me thinking, well, what would I want to say if I wanted to give her a book? And that's where that story came about. My time machine story came about, again, after a conversation with my daughter, who had come home from school learning about the past, present and future.
Oh, wow.
And she said, Mum, you know, I want to give you a hug in the future. And then she said, I'm giving you a hug right now in the present. And she said, that was now in the past.
Wow.
And that got me thinking about that too. So there's no set thing, I guess. But with picture books, they're a concise form. They're 32 pages, usually less than 500 words. You know, you're pushing it at 1,000 words.
Yep.
And I guess from an idea, I will scribble down an idea, but then I have to make sure it works within that format. And part of that is a consideration of how it's going to work with things like page turns and pictures, and how I can cut down my text and go to it in a way that the pictures can tell the story too.
Yes.
And also leaving space for the illustrator to bring something new, because every picture book you do, you know, it's a partnership, and you have an initial idea and initial words, but that's only part of the story. And some of that storytelling is done through the pictures in a really important way. And so you sort of want to leave enough space for, you know, other people to come in and to create something better than what you could imagine yourself. in terms of, I guess, the publishing and getting the illustrator on board, both of my stories, I signed up with the publishers, and we have a discussion, I guess, before signing up about the sorts of illustrations that might work. And in both cases, it was fairly collaborative. They presented me with a list of illustrators they thought would work for each book, and they gave me, I guess, a sort of almost like a mood board of ideas. I sort of said, well, this would work and so would this. I mean, I really loved all of them. To be honest, I'm just delighted with how they've turned out. But they went from there, approached the illustrators, and they happened to be available. They happened to say yes, and we went from there. So, yeah, I was really fortunate to be able to work with Lucia Masciullo and Lucinda Gifford on these two books. They're both incredible illustrators.
And they're quite contrasting books in some way. So I think what's really interesting for me, having worked from A to Z Dreaming Differently to this book as a time machine, I was really interested in how your parenting journey kind of intersected with the books themselves, because it got me thinking about going into parenting initially and going, the serious sort of information I must pass on as a gift to my children, which is very important. And then in this book as a time machine, there's a lot of fun there, and there's a lot of referencing and meta work and stuff like that. So it's almost like you're playing with a child in that book as well and going, hey, this is fun. What if we go back here? What if we go forwards here? Were you conscious of the difference between the two projects in terms of tone and feel, or not so much?
Yeah, they're absolutely different tones and feels, but I feel like that represents my own personality because, you know, I have my more serious side and I have my more fun, jokey side. But I think both of them, what I'm trying to do, there is a form of play with the child within both books, even though one of them is a lot more jokey fun and, you know, might have the kids laughing a lot more. The other one, I'm still, I guess, trying to play with them in a light-hearted way, you know, about like roaring or splashing in puddles or, you know, doing sort of things that evoke that sense of play. So for me, it's still about entertaining and play, and that's kind of what's driving both books to a large extent.
And I think what I really did love about An A to Z of Dreaming Differently, you talked about rules, and there are these moments as a parent where you see the self forming and their uniqueness, and it's such a wonderful, wondrous thing. And there's so much within schooling in particular that's like, this is how you fit.
That's right.
And I'm not sure if that's that much of a healthy thing to pass on to a child as they're forming, to go, this is how you're going to fit into things. I think they need a bit of that. But I'm interested in this idea of raw and, like, you know, how we work with, typically a child has a greater emotional canvas, right? And it's adults who have kind of shut the doors on certain feelings, thoughts, and that kind of stuff. So, yeah, is it something that after you've worked on a book like An A to Z of Dreaming Differently, is that an easily integrated space back into your parenting, or does it get you to reflect, or have you kind of already done the reflecting?
I think when I was writing it, I was sort of thinking about how I wanted to parent and how, I guess, I wanted to provide a counterpoint to the rule following. I guess, you know, obviously it's important that kids follow certain rules, you know, such as looking left and right before you cross the road and all that sort of stuff.
Hygiene.
Exactly, yes, washing your hands. But I think for me, you know, it's really hard being a kid. You're basically sitting in a school environment or wherever you are all day. You're being told what to do constantly. You have very little autonomy. And I think I wanted to relate and tap into that, but also to show kids that it's still okay to ask questions, that you don't have to do what everyone else is doing. It's okay to have your own unique passions and way of being. And so I guess that was, from a parenting point of view, an important message that I wanted to pass on. And I guess it's something that I still want to instill, you know, within my own kids. I think it's a fairly universal message that applies across, you know, whether they're young and, you know, young babies or, you know, toddlers, you know, through to, you know, I've been speaking to high school students about the messaging in the book, you know, particularly around graduations and stuff like that, because I think that's sort of, as a parent, a message I want to continue on or carry on.
And is that something that you picked up when you were younger? Like, do you remember certain books that spoke to you at that same age, or that encouraged you to look at things differently in a way that you previously had?
I don't remember specific books that spoke to me in the same way, but I think books in general just opened my eyes to the fact that there were other worlds out there. So, I loved a ton of books when I was a kid. I loved all the Narnia books. I loved Maurice Gleitzman, Paul Jennings.
Yeah.
I love picture books like, Where the Wild Things Are and classics like that.
Yeah.
I spent hours poring over them because for me it was a way to almost deep dive into other worlds. So I think indirectly, books open my eyes to the fact that there are other worlds out there and other ways of being, which I think, is a really important thing.
No, that's a beautiful way of putting it. And as an adult, which authors inspire you now? Do you read primarily within the genre? Are there other writers that you sort of... Does your reading self mirror your writing self, or is it a completely different entity?
I read anything and everything, to be honest. I read adult literature, I read adult non-fiction, but as a kid-lit writer, and also having kids myself, I'm always reading kid literature as well. So, it's part of, I guess, learning and part of your own craft to do that as well. So I'm really always interested in what's coming out. I'm interested in what other people are doing. But yeah, I guess at night before I go to sleep, I will probably read adult literature, just across a range of anything really.
And I guess the other question I had, writing children's books, do you think much about things like adaptation or other formats for telling those stories? Is that something you've explored yet or that you'd like to explore?
Yeah, I mean, for me, picture books are my sort of main thing that I really, really love doing. And so I'm really fascinated between the intersection between images and words and how they work and sort of that end product that you get where there's a synergy, in that way of communicating with kids. But that said, I'm looking at longer form writing. I'm really interested in conveying stories generally because, I'm speaking to kids at schools, I'm speaking to them in libraries. You've got to sort of tap into how they think and, how they listen and how they respond. So, yeah, I mean, I am interested in all forms of storytelling. And
how do we begin? Yeah. There's so much out there. That's the other thing I find interesting is that we grew up with books and kids now are growing up with stories in different formats. So it's almost us doing the catching up.
That's right.
The kids, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of this, you're presenting a picture book power workshop at this year's Perth Festival Writers Weekend, which we're very excited about. So tell us a little bit about what's in store for those who are attending or those who are thinking about booking in.
Yeah, look, I am so excited about this workshop because it is basically a 2-hour deep dive into the world of picture books. And I guess it's really rare to have that opportunity to work so closely with a small group of kids on something where you can really go into that depth. Yeah. And I think this is a sort of workshop for kids who would maybe be interested in the Make Your Own Storybook, Make Your Own Picture Book competitions, run through the CBCA WA. That's later in the year. Yep. But we're going to be covering all aspects of the picture book process, and in particular we're going to be making our own picture books. So it's going to be a really hands-on workshop. We're going to explore things like how words and pictures work together to tell a story, how stories work generally and story arcs. But I guess I want to get the kids writing their own stories, and I think that's a really important part. And so I'm hoping that by the end of it, everyone will have sort of storyboarded ideas and come up with, where ideas come from and got a few ideas going, and actually have a picture book on the go by the end of it.
That's really exciting.
Yeah.
And to finish, I'm interested. You've had such a wonderful journey and such a varied journey through various jobs and roles and writing books. What would you say to young Tracey if she walked in the door right now? What advice would you impart or what would you want to share with her?
Oh, gosh, that's a really hard question. I think I would just say to trust yourself and to follow your own dreams, because I think, I've come back to who I was as a kid in a way, in many ways. I mean, I love all parts of my life and, they all work together. But I think, there's a part of me that's sort of come back to my childhood self in a way through books, and I'm really happy to be doing that again.
It's a beautiful thing, Tracey. Well, for now, all that remains is for me to thank Tracey Dembo for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
And in the meantime, the Perth Festival is coming, arriving very soon in late February. So head to Perth Festival if you want to find out more about any of the wonderful events happening, including Tracey Dembo's wonderful picture book, Power Workshop. Have a wonderful day, and we shall be back again very soon.